So to continue on with our talk of controlling microbes, one of the things to think about, and I've mentioned a little bit here in the previous recording, is how do we effectively disinfect? And so it's really important that a person reads labels. If you actually look at some of the products that you have at home and look carefully at the label, which you maybe never have done before, it kind of gives you some guidelines. It talks about what sort of species this chemical is meant to kill off. You know, does it kill bacteria, certain bacteria? Does it kill influenza? And so it's kind of important to look at that. It also then may give you some guidelines on how much to use, if there's any sort of dilution that's necessary, how long should you leave it on. If it's a spray, usually there's kind of a recommendation of 15 to 30 seconds. I know in some industrial settings, this can be a lot longer as well. So it's kind of important because if you were to just, spray something on and then wipe it off right away, you may be doing a little degerming, but you're probably not killing much off in that case as well. The last section here will be talking about different drugs that act as antimicrobials. When we talk about antibiotics, we're dealing with mostly bacteria, and so sometimes these are called antibacterials as well. But we'll also talk about antibiotic resistance and how we should be responsible in our use for that. And so when it came to the first kind of medicines that were used in order to kill bacteria, Paul Ehrlich is credited with this one, and he found something. It was kind of an arsenic-based compound called salvarsan, and he found that it killed the bacteria that caused syphilis. And so syphilis is a sexually transmitted disease. If you want to read more about it, you can look at the link here provided. You probably have to look at the regular PowerPoint to actually click on that. But then that can be a pretty deadly disease, can have a lot of disastrous side effects, can be important when a woman is pregnant, can affect the fetus, and can be really bad. And so it turns out, it's pretty easy to actually kill if it's known. And so this really saved a lot of people, and that was a big discovery. Also looking at sort of different medicines here, Gerard Domack, I'm sure I'm pronouncing that wrong. That looks like a German name, but he actually won a Nobel Prize for coming up with a chemical of his own and tested it on his own daughter, which I'm glad that it worked. Others kind of looking at streptomycin here, the term antibiotic, and then the big one is Alexander Fleming and his discovery of penicillin. And so a little bit about Alexander Fleming here. He was studying bacteria, and so staphylococci bacteria, and he was growing them on agar plates. So he had a lot of these plates. He was kind of studying how they grew. You can look and see here. It's kind of hard to see, but this would be an agar plate, and there's different colonies of bacteria. When we see a colony of bacteria, it looks like a little dot growing on a plate. That means there's actually probably thousands of bacteria growing, kind of all piling on top of each other. But one thing he noticed is that he had some plates that, I've heard different stories, he kind of had thrown them out or wasn't planning on using them anymore, but they got moldy, and so some mold started to grow here. Where he saw the mold, he noticed that around the mold, the bacteria was not growing as much as it had been out here. And so the mold actually inhibited the growth of the bacteria. So after finding this out, much research was done, and eventually the commercial development of penicillin came to be, and we still use penicillin today. So there's actually different types of penicillin. It really works best on diseases that are caused by gram-positive bacteria, because what this drug does is actually breaks down the cell wall. And if you remember, gram-positive bacteria have a thicker layer of peptidoglycan than gram-negative, and gram-negative had that lipid layer on the outside. And so this has gone on to cure lots of diseases. The only problem is that some organisms are acquiring resistance to it, and so it's not working necessarily like it used to as well. This is kind of a nice picture here, which I couldn't get to download, so I wanted to show you that here. So I'm not going to pay $20 for it, but this is kind of a better picture, and you can Google these and kind of look it up. But this would be our agar plate. These are the colonies that are growing, so there's a lot growing out here, but where that penicillin mold is growing, you can see that there's really not much growing right around it. So it inhibited the growth there. So different medicines are going to work differently on different parts of a cell, and this is shown, bacterial cells are shown here. And so if you kind of remember what a bacterial cell entails, it definitely has a cell wall for the most part. Most often it has the cell membrane, it has DNA, it has ribosomes, and those ribosomes go on to actually synthesize different proteins that the cell would need itself. And so different medicines are going to sort of hit different areas of the cell, but if the cell doesn't work properly or can't maintain its structure, then the cells are going to die off. And so there's several examples listed there. And then also depending upon, if somebody has an infection, it's important to know what type it is. Is it gram-positive? Is it gram-negative? That can be a big decision as far as what antibiotic you may choose to treat the bacterial cell with. So antibiotics work on bacteria, but there's also other types of medicines that would work on other types of microorganisms that we've talked about, like viruses, fungus, and protists as well. And so then the problem of antibiotic resistance. And so the definition here, when a microorganism overcomes the effects of a drug via evolution. What I mean by that is that basically you could have some, if we look at bacteria, you could have some bacteria and they used to be killed off by a certain antibiotic, but their traits have changed. So they've expressed some sort of new trait. Their DNA has changed. They've picked up a new gene and they express a new trait, and this trait allows them to survive the effects of the drug that normally kills them. And so you may have a couple different strains out there, some that have the mutation, some that don't, but those that have the mutation and can, don't get killed off, then they're going to stick around to survive. Once they stick around to survive, they're going to go on to reproduce, and they're going to reproduce with DNA that allowed them to actually not be affected by the medicine in the first place. So why this occurs, bacteria are constantly trying to adapt to their environment. As you have new generation after new generation, those that have the strongest traits survive. And so if you have a lot of exposure to antibiotics, then you're giving the bacteria a lot of chances to kind of mutate and change. And so usually it's because of overuse and of these antibiotics. But the bacteria are, you can kind of think about them as they're getting smarter and they're finding a way to sort of, keep their population going. And so this kind of shows what happens if somebody actually, in the top section here, if somebody has a bacterial infection, kind of shown in green here, and they take their antibiotics, eventually they kill everything off and then there's nothing left. In the second section here, if there are some cells that are resistant, some that have mutated a little bit, and maybe those don't all get killed off. This could be because somebody stopped taking their antibiotic and they kind of left, they killed the weaker ones, but they left the stronger ones there, and then guess who's going to multiply? The stronger ones, because there's no more competition for them there as well. They have all the free resources that they need, etc. And so it's just important to make sure that we follow the rules that we'll talk about here in just a minute. And so why is this a global concern? A lot of people are dying. It used to be that, we could treat certain diseases, and then now these diseases are not treatable with the same medicines that used to work. I saw an article about a woman who, was found she was resistant to about 26 different types of antibiotics. Just, anything that they wanted to give to her, her body would not allow them to work properly. The things that she had were not getting killed off by them. Antibiotics may not work at all in the future. We're definitely limited. We're trying to find new ones to use and different ones to use, but we're getting more and more limited as time goes on. And then a lot of people are really uneducated. They don't understand how this works. Somebody is sick and they go to their doctor and they demand an antibiotic. Antibiotics certainly have their place, but if you have a viral infection, it's important to consider that as well and maybe not jump to using antibiotics right away. And so the table to the right kind of lists certain species that have acquired some of this resistance as well, or certain diseases that we can look at here and see what they are and just kind of take a look. And so as far as control, there's kind of some simple rules that we can think about, and somebody will be talking about this in the discussion forum in this module. But like I kind of mentioned before, do not demand antibiotics. And so if you have a viral infection, antibiotics are not going to work. I know sometimes people think, they feel better just having some sort of medicine to take, but if it doesn't work, then it's certainly going to only further the problem. And so it may be, it may not be known whether you have a viral or bacterial infection, but a lot of times maybe waiting a few days if you're not too sick can be an option, and then considering an antibiotic in the future, at least kind of putting it off a little bit as well. If you are taking an antibiotic, don't stop taking it unless you have an allergic reaction or something. Call your doctor. But you really should take what is prescribed and for the amount of time that it's prescribed. And so, as we kind of saw in that other figure before, if you take it for a little while and, let's say you take it for half the time that you're supposed to, well, maybe you've killed off all of the weak bacteria. But the stronger, more resistant ones, it might take longer to kill them off, but you quit taking the medicine. So guess who's around now to multiply and maybe make things worse and then go infect somebody else as well. And so that kind of goes along with, don't save antibiotics for future use, because again, you shouldn't take just, half a prescription or a third of a prescription, but you shouldn't also share them because, whoever is getting those antibiotics, they might be allergic to them. It might not be the right dose. It may be something totally different that they have. And basically people should not play doctor, but should make sure that they get the proper care that they need. So it's important that we educate ourselves, but then also kind of educate others, which will help to hopefully slow down the problem a little bit.